Hello, my name is Tiffany Smith, and the name of my presentation will be True American Tragedy, Native Americans. Genocide can be used when referring to Native Americans in the European invasion. Churchill states Native American population fell from 12 million to 237,000 during the first 400 years of this country's history. The primary agenda for this country was to remove the Indians from their land. They succeeded and took over 98% of Native Americans' land. 2.5 million survive today, but the horror of mass killing, psychological problems, and oppression still have a huge impact on this population today. The aftermath. Native Americans pride themselves as people who have a high sense of dignity and integrity. So the loss of culture was devastating, to say the least. Their sense of self was greatly impacted. Native Americans were forced to abandon their own culture and take on the Europeans' culture. Their children were forced to attend boarding schools with no contact with their family for years. Their language, clothing, rituals were all forbidden. This removal of children from their homes was one of the most devastating traumas because Native Americans value family ties heavily. Unlike American society, whose family consists of traditionally mother, father, and siblings, Native Americans' family network is extended and include blood and non-blood relatives. This is referred to as a kinship society. Along with family destruction, Native Americans have the highest consumption of weekly alcohol than any other ethnic group. This abuse of self-meditation can be linked to a feeling of hopelessness. Suicide rates are 3.2 times higher than the national average. Studies show family disruption and loss of cultural background place adolescent Native Americans at a higher risk of suicide, alcoholism, and depression. Assessment. It is important to gain better understanding of any client's past trauma because that trauma can still and may still impact the person's psychological and mental state at that moment. Cultural awareness is vital to building a relationship with the Native American client of trust. We must remember as future social workers that we have to remain less ethnocentric as possible. It's never okay to impose our own feelings onto a client. We must support their values and belief system instead. We should also show appreciation for their culture and beliefs. In return, this will help build trust and better understanding between the client and the social worker. In this culture, listening is a great sign of respect. Listening is heavily valued. So, as social workers, it is important for us to adapt and refrain from being overly verbal to make the client more comfortable. This is why it's also important to be culturally aware of the client. We want to encourage the Native American client to discover the possibility of change within the frameworks of their culture, meaning it's okay to involve traditional Native American modes of healing. For example, storytelling is a healing part of Native Americans' culture. This can be used to promote healthy choices. Similarities between African American and Native Americans. I would say the number one thing would be hardship. But the positive things that Native Americans and African Americans share are their rich music traditions, rich culture, the many different unique languages amongst the big population, and social relations. On the flip side, negative aspects would be cross-generational trauma transmission, which can be explained as traumatized children being affected directly or indirectly by parents' post-traumatic effects, and this carries on and on and on to the next generation. Also, negative aspects would be forced religion, mass killings, and oppression. And also, African Americans were brought to this land, and Native Americans were killed off the land. In the future, this assignment alone has improved my understanding of this population tremendously. It is important to keep in mind the differences can be valued and respected when they aren't necessarily your own beliefs. Remember that the barriers between social workers and Native Americans should always be understood, and to always gain the trust of the population. This will be successful to all of us in the future.